All right, get ready to dive deep today. We're heading to Kielder Forest in England.
Sounds exciting.
It is. It's like stepping right into a nature documentary.
Ooh, I love
Me
those.
too. So in Kielder Forest, we've got this fascinating relationship going on between red squirrels and their predator, the northern goshawk.
Classic predator-prey dynamic always makes for a good story.
You'd think, right? Fierce raptor versus adorable fluffy squirrel. But get this, these goshawks, they're not actually the squirrel-devouring villains we might assume.
Really, that's surprising. I would have thought goshawks would be all over those squirrels.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it turns out they're not really a big threat to the red squirrel population.
Interesting. So what's the story here? What are we diving into today?
Well, we're going to untangle this whole ecological drama, look at some research that was done, and figure out why those goshawks aren't exactly ruling the squirrel roost.
I'm all ears.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Because first, we got to set the stage. So, red squirrels in England, they've been having a bit of a rough time.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Competition from the gray squirrels, right?
Exactly. Those gray squirrels, they're like the bullies of the forest. They outcompete the reds for resources, and to make matters worse, they carry this nasty disease called squirrel pox virus.
Right, I remember reading about that. Fatal to the reds, but doesn't bother the grays. Talk about unfair.
Absolutely. So the red squirrels have been pushed into these conifer forests, like Kielder, which have become like their last stronghold.
A refuge, yeah, making their last stand in the conifer forests.
Exactly. But then, here come the goshawks. They were reintroduced to the area, and everyone started worrying about the impact they might have on the already struggling red squirrels.
Oh, I see. So the concern was that these reintroduced goshawks would just swoop in and wipe out the red squirrels.
Pretty much. It seemed like a recipe for disaster. But then, some clever researchers decided to take a closer look at what those goshawks were actually eating.
Okay, so a deep dive into goshawk diet. Let's see what they found.
Well, they did this study, right? And what they discovered was, well, it wasn't quite the squirrel massacre everyone was expecting.
Oh, really? Spill the beans. What was on the menu?
Brace yourself. Red squirrels made up a surprisingly tiny proportion of their diet,
How tiny are we talking?
less than 2%.
Wait, seriously, that's practically nothing.
I know, right? It's like finding out a shark's favorite food is seaweed. Totally unexpected.
So if it's not squirrels, what are these goshawks feasting on in Kielder Forest?
Birds, mainly. Pigeons, corvids, game birds, those are their top picks.
So they've got quite the diverse palate. Interesting that it's so different from other parts of Europe where red squirrels are a much more common prey for goshawks.
Yeah, that's what makes this whole thing so intriguing. There's clearly something unique about the Kielder ecosystem that's influencing their dietary choices.
A Kielder culinary mystery. I'm hooked.
Yeah.
So what's the secret ingredient in this forest recipe that makes red squirrels less appealing to goshawks?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Oh, I love a good twist.
The researchers uncovered this fascinating link between the number of red squirrels in the goshawk diet and the abundance of, wait for it, Norway spruce cones.
Cones. Okay, that's not what I was expecting. What's the connection?
And there's another layer to this. There's a 3-year lag involved.
A 3-year lag. Now I'm really curious.
Right. It's all very mysterious. So let me explain. Norway spruce cones. They're like little nutritional time capsules for red squirrels.
How so?
They're packed with seeds that stay good for ages. So it's a reliable, long-lasting food source.
Oh, I see. It's sort of like a squirrel pantry stocked with long-lasting goodies.
Exactly. Now, Kielder also has a lot of Sitka spruce, but their cones are smaller and not as nutritious for the squirrels.
So the squirrels have a preference, the gourmet option.
They're cone connoisseurs. When those Norway spruce cones are abundant, the squirrels are happy and well-fed, sticking close to their food source.
Makes sense. Why go far when you have a feast at your doorstep?
Exactly. But when the cone supply drops, they have to venture further out to find food.
Ugh, that's where the danger comes in. Makes them more vulnerable to those goshawk attacks.
You got it. It's a boom and bust cycle. Plenty of cones, squirrels thrive. Cone shortage, squirrels on the move, and more exposed.
So it's like the abundance of these special cones is actually acting as a shield for the red squirrels, a natural defense mechanism against predation.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why the researchers found that red squirrel predation spikes during periods of low cone availability.
Makes perfect sense. It all comes down to food in the end.
It really does. But how does all of this actually play out in terms of squirrel survival rates? Did they manage to actually track individual squirrels to see how they fared in this whole predator-prey drama?
They did. And what they found was Quite the adventures, actually. More than half of the squirrels they were tracking ended up dispersing, moving out of the study area completely.
Wow, more than half. That's a lot of wandering squirrels. So it's not just food that gets them moving then.
Seems that way, yeah. But for those that stayed put in the study area, around 16% were predated.
Okay, so the goshawks aren't totally innocent then. They do snack on a squirrel every now and then.
True, but even with the predation, the overall survival rate for the squirrels in the study still pretty good, around 77%.
That is pretty good, I guess. So it seems like even with some goshawk snacking, the squirrel population is holding its own.
Exactly. And remember, this was just a small study area, a little slice of Kielder forest. When you scale up to the whole forest, the impact of goshawk predation is probably much lower overall.
Yeah, good point. Makes you realize just how much is happening in a whole forest, right?
Definitely. And there's another point, too. The fact that red squirrels and goshawks can coexist. We see that in all sorts of habitats across Europe and Asia. It's a natural balance. In Kielder, at least, the goshawks aren't the ones driving a decline in red squirrel numbers.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
So if the goshawks aren't the main threat, then why are the red squirrels still endangered? What else is putting pressure on them?
It's a good question, and it shows just how complicated conservation can be. Remember, this study just looked at one little piece of the red squirrel's life. There's still that competition from the gray squirrels, a big factor.
Right, the gray squirrels and that squirrel pox virus they carry.
Exactly. They outcompete the reds for resources, and then there's the disease. It's like a double whammy for the red squirrels.
A real-life survival game out there in the forest.
You got it. And that's why this research is so important. Helps us understand these relationships and figure out where conservation efforts can make the biggest difference. Speaking of conservation, the researchers really push for planting more Norway spruce in Kielder Forest.
Makes sense. More cones, more squirrel snacks.
Yeah,
So more Norway spruce, fewer Sitka spruce.
got it. But what about those gray squirrels? Anything that can be done about them?
That's the million-dollar question. Gray squirrel control is controversial. Lots of debate about the best way to do it.
Like what kind of debate? Well, some people say trapping and culling is the way to go. Others say no, let's focus on non-lethal methods, like contraception. No easy answers. It's all about finding the right balance between what's ethical and what's best for conservation.
It sounds like there's still a lot to figure out when it comes to helping those red squirrels.
Mm.
But you know what? I want to go back to those cones for a second. It's just amazing how something as simple as a cone can have such a huge impact on the whole ecosystem.
I agree. It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Mm,
And what's really fascinating is that this link between food and predator-prey dynamics, it could have implications for conservation way beyond Kielder Forest.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Could this kind of analysis looking at predator-prey relationships and habitat preferences could be used to help protect other species in other parts of the world?
Definitely. This kind of ecological detective work is essential for coming up with effective conservation strategies. By studying these relationships in an ecosystem, we can figure out what's really crucial for survival and then tailor our interventions accordingly.
So it's not just about protecting one species in isolation. It's about looking at the bigger picture and managing the whole ecosystem. It's like thinking like Mother Nature herself.
Exactly. Recognizing that everything is connected and even small changes can have these ripple effects. For example, let's say we want to protect a specific bird species. We need to know where they nest, what they eat, what eats them, and how all of that is affected by habitat, climate change, human activities.
It's like solving this giant ecological puzzle with all these different pieces fitting together.
Exactly. And the more pieces we can put together, the better we'll be at protecting biodiversity and ensuring a healthy planet for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We started with a squirrel story and ended up learning so much about how ecosystems work and the challenges of conservation.
It's been a pleasure sharing this research with you.
But before we go, I'm curious for those listeners who are feeling inspired to become ecological detectives themselves, where can they go to learn more? Any resources you'd recommend?
Oh, there are so many great resources out there. You could start by checking out the websites of organizations like the Wildlife Trusts, the RSPB, the Woodland Trust. They're all doing fantastic work to protect British wildlife.
And for those who like things a bit more casual, there are tons of nature documentaries, podcasts, and books out there that explore the world of ecology.
Exactly. The key is to stay curious, keep learning, and never underestimate the power of understanding how life on Earth is all connected.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of red squirrels, goshawks, and those all-important conifer cones. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way.
It's been a pleasure sharing this fascinating research with you and your listeners.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. And for those who like things a bit more casual, there are tons of nature documentaries, podcasts,
Oh, yeah.
other than this one, of course,
Of course.
and books out there exploring the world of ecology.
Exactly. The key is to just stay curious, keep learning, and never underestimate that power, of understanding how everything's connected, how life on Earth is all connected.
Beautifully said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today, the world of red squirrels, goshawks, and those oh-so-important conifer cones.
Fascinating stuff.
Hope you enjoyed it, learned something new.
Absolutely. I know I did.
Always learning something new on these deep dives.
Always.
A big thank you to you for joining us and sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.